Hi, welcome to Nina in the Kitchen, where today we are making risotto Milanese, which is a saffron flavored risotto. It's so delicious and it's great for stews, especially it's a classic with ossobuco, which I will get to make. So let me show you the ingredients. We're going to mix olive oil and butter. You can use one or the other. I have 3 cups, 700 milliliters of chicken broth. You can also use beef broth. I'm going to use half a teaspoon of saffron threads, 1/4 cup of small chopped onion. This is arborio rice. Arborio is a very special rice. It's grown right around the Po Valley region in Italy, so it's readily available there, but it's also available in the United States very easily. This is 1/4 cup or 50 milliliters of a dry white wine and 1/4 cup of Parmesan cheese. And then, of course, salt to taste. If you choose to use a boxed or canned broth, that's fine, but go with low sodium because as this evaporates, the sodium might just get to be too much. I'm going to start on a medium heat. Now, if you've never made risotto before, one of the things that scares people is that you have to tend to it constantly, and you do have to stay in the kitchen. I would not leave, but really, you don't have to stand there and stir for 25 minutes. I do not use a spoon because look at the footprint of a spoon. There's not much there, really. So I choose something like this, just a spatula that's flat. You can do a lot more stirring. I'm going to put in 2 tablespoons of butter and just a little drizzle of olive oil. And what you want to do is just get some oil, get some fat on the bottom of the pan. And before it gets too hot, I'm throwing in the onion. And you want this onion to sweat. I took some of that butter out, that was just too much fat. Go with 1 tablespoon and then a little swirl of olive oil. That's an extra virgin olive oil because this heat is not going to ever be too high to destroy the antioxidants in the oil. This is going on a medium-low heat right now. You do not want this to brown. Just let it sweat, and in about 3 minutes, we'll move on. In the meantime, this is saffron from Spain. And saffron is a very interesting spice. It's very expensive. So when you buy it, it's always in these little vials that you get them in. What I wanted to show you about this is that if you'll notice, some of these tips are yellow. That is a good indication that what you're buying is actually a good quality saffron. If everything is exactly that same orangey, rusty color that you see, if it's all the same, then it's probably been dyed. Do not buy that. Do not buy powdered saffron. Powdered saffron can be mixed with other spices and you wouldn't know it. Either way, you're kind of getting ripped off. I find this, believe it or not, on occasion, not always, but at Costco. Just peruse the spice aisle every time you go, and once in a while you may bump into it at your Costco. Now, and I'm just taking a small pinch. What happens with saffron, I'll go with half of this, just a few little threads. If you use too much saffron, it can taste medicinal, so you have to kind of be careful about the amount that you use. You can also just put them in your fingers and shred them, but this will break up as it goes. Now I'm going to put the arborio rice in, and one thing I want to say about arborio is that you need to toast this when you make a risotto. You take these grains, you do not wash them. They have a starch that covers each grain. What I'm doing is I am toasting each kernel of rice. You just want to get each kernel covered in fat. And if you'll notice, this is the same technique that we used making pilaf. And you don't need to brown it. Maybe as soon as it turns straw color, stop. Stop right then. And the way that you stop the toasting is by putting your wine in. So what's happening here right now is that you're taking those starches and by putting fat around it and heating that up, you're forming a capsule over each grain of rice. And that's important in how creamy this becomes at the end. I can smell it, it's fragrant, so we're ready to move on. Some of these are starting to yellow. This is a dry white wine. It's room temperature, and that's going in all at once. And you just kind of move that around. You know, this rice is a very, very starchy rice. So what the wine does is it gives it an acid to sort of balance out the starch and the acid. So it's a good flavor to have in there, and it's an important one. Just kind of watch this, and as the wine is absorbed into the rice, it's time to move on to your broth. Now this could be any meat broth, and if you want to make this vegetarian, it could absolutely be a vegetable broth too. So you just pour this in a little at a time, just like that, and then you stir, and then you can let it sit. And what's happening here is you're gently, as you stir, you're gently coaxing the starches from the rice and bringing it into this broth. And you can see it already is starting to look rather creamy. And then you add just about a ladleful at a time. So what we started with was 1 cup of rice, which becomes 2 cups when it's cooked. In order to cook that amount, you're going to need about 3 cups of stock or broth, and that will give you 4 servings as a side dish or as a starter. So it's easy to remember, right? It's 1 cup turns to 2. You need 3 cups of broth to feed 4 people. So 1, 2, 3, 4, easy. That's how I remember it anyway. You want this on a medium-low heat or medium, so that you're coming up to somewhere between a simmer and a boil. Also, you want your stock to be the same temperature. Now, I had this in the microwave, and if I were working at my stove, I would just have a second pot on the stove and keep this simmering. If this is cold, you'll just coagulate those starches. The other thing is, if you'll notice, I'm using a high-sided pan. You want something with a heavy bottom. I actually have tested this in the kitchen where I work, and I found that if you use a wide pan, like a fry pan, a saute pan, what happens is this evaporates so quickly that it doesn't cook the same, it doesn't cook right. You don't get as creamy as if you make it in a pan with high sides. The evaporation changes, which is really interesting if you're a nerd like me. Another consideration when you make risotto is the strength of your broth. If your broth is too strong or very strong, then you may end up with risotto that's just a little too much flavor. I know that sounds odd, but what you want to do in that case is just add some water to your stock and just work from there. And how do you know when your risotto is finished? Well, you have to taste it. I just tasted this. It's still a little too crunchy in the center, but you do want that bite. You want it to be al dente. I just added salt because, as I said before, my broth is not salted, and this was just absolutely flat. Now's a great time to season it because any grain, any starch, when you cook it this way, it's going to absorb your seasonings, and salt being one of them, it's like salting the water when you make a pasta. This is very yellow now, and that's happening from this beautiful saffron, and the aroma is coming through, and I think that was just a perfect amount. We've been working this pot so that these starches are gently coming off of the rice grains, and it's nice and creamy getting there. I'm going to add a little more water now. Well, this is ready. I've been tasting it. It's al dente. I'm turning the heat off, taking it off the heat. Now here's an interesting thing with risotto. It's a food, it's a dish, but it's also a technique. And this part of it is called the mantecatura. In Spanish, the word for butter is mantequilla. And the Italians took that word and turned it into a cooking term, mantecatura. I hope I said that right. If you're Italian and I didn't, I do apologize. Mantecatura, I think that's right. And what this does is it finishes the dish with a creaminess, makes it even a little more creamy, and then to top it off, you put your Parmesan cheese in at the very end. The parm goes in, and of course you can serve it on the side as well. How thick or thin or tight you like this, I think, is completely up to you. Here it is. Look at the color of this risotto, and that's just from that saffron. It's just beautiful. If you were to serve this as a starter or as a side dish, you would want about 1/3 to 1/2 cup per person. But like I said, you can also make this into a main course. And there's so many ways to change this up, which we'll get to later. Cheesy, nice butter finish. This is a really, really nice risotto. It's creamy and beautiful. If you make this, please write to me on YouTube. Let me know about it. And I will hopefully see you again soon. Come on back for more stuff. Bye, guys.